I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Sharon Hastings marching up my driveway with that familiar pinched expression she wore whenever she was about to make someone's day miserable. I was in my garage, doing routine maintenance on my backup generator when her shadow fell across the concrete floor. It was 98 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona, and the last thing I wanted was a confrontation with the HOA president. "Harrison Williams," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need that generator." I looked up from where I was crouched next to the 15-kilowatt Generac, wrench still in hand. Sharon was dressed in her usual business casual attire, despite the heat that was wilting everything else in the neighborhood. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move in the afternoon breeze, and her arms were crossed over her chest like she was preparing for battle. "Excuse me," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on a rag. "The HOA is hosting the summer social tomorrow evening, and with this heat wave, we need to ensure we have backup power for the community center. I'm collecting generators from residents who have them. You clearly have one, so I'll need you to deliver it to the center by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what I was hearing. "Sharon, this is my personal property. I bought it with my own money. You can't just demand that I hand it over." Her eyes narrowed. "According to Section 12, Paragraph 8 of our HOA bylaws, all residents are required to contribute to community events when called upon. I'm calling upon you now. Besides, you live alone. You don't need a generator this size. The community center serves everyone." "That section is about voluntary contributions for events, not mandatory confiscation of personal property," I said, keeping my voice level. I'd read the bylaws front to back when I moved into Saguaro Heights 3 years ago. Sharon had a habit of creatively interpreting the rules to suit her purposes, and I'd learned early on to know my rights. "I'm not asking, Harrison. I'm telling you. Generator, tomorrow, 3 o'clock. She turned to leave, then paused. "And if you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to issue a fine. $500 for failure to cooperate with HOA directives." She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the driveway pavement. I stood there in the heat, feeling my blood pressure rise. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Sharon had no idea that I was an electrical contractor, and more specifically, that I was the Harrison Williams of Williams Electrical Services, the company that had the contract with Arizona Power and Light to handle scheduled maintenance and emergency repairs in this entire section of Phoenix. And tomorrow, from 2 to 6 in the afternoon, there was a planned power outage for our neighborhood. Sharon Street, Cactus Ridge Drive was first on the list. I'd been the one to schedule it, coordinate it, and I'd be on site supervising the work. The notification had gone out to all residents 2 weeks ago via mail and email. Apparently, Sharon either hadn't read it or had forgotten about it. I went back inside my house and checked my work email on my laptop. Sure enough, there was the service order. Planned outage for equipment upgrade on the transformer serving Cactus Ridge Drive and surrounding streets. Duration, 4 hours. Date, tomorrow. The summer social was scheduled for 6 in the evening, which meant if everything went according to plan, power would be restored just as people started arriving. But if there were complications, which happened about 30% of the time with this kind of work, the outage could extend well into the evening. My phone rang. It was my crew supervisor, Marcus Chen. "Hey, boss. Just confirming for tomorrow. We're starting at 1400 hours, right?" "That's right," I said. "I'll be there to supervise. It's a straightforward transformer swap, but I want to make sure everything goes smoothly." "Got it. Weather's supposed to be even hotter tomorrow. 102. Which is exactly why we're doing this now, before summer really hits and we start seeing equipment failures from the heat load. Phoenix summers were brutal on electrical infrastructure. Better to do planned maintenance now than deal with emergency outages in July when temperatures could hit 115. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat down and thought about my options. I could lend Sharon the generator, take the high road, be the bigger person. But I knew Sharon. She'd see it as weakness, as validation that she could push people around and get what she wanted. And the generator wasn't some cheap, little portable unit. It was a serious piece of equipment that I'd spent nearly $6,000 on after a 3-day power outage last year during monsoon season, had cost me a freezer full of food and 3 days of miserable heat. Besides, there was a principle at stake. The HOA didn't have the authority to commandeer personal property, no matter how Sharon interpreted the bylaws. If I gave in now, what would she demand next? I decided to do nothing. I wouldn't deliver the generator and I wouldn't respond to her demand. Let her issue the fine if she wanted. I'd dispute it through the proper channels. That evening, I got a text message from my neighbor, Pete Morrison. Pete was a retired accountant who lived 2 doors down and had become a good friend since I'd moved to the neighborhood. Did Sharon hit you up for your generator too? I called him instead of texting back. Yeah, she came by this afternoon. Did she come to your place? She tried. I told her I sold mine, which is true actually. Sold it to my son when he bought a house in Tucson. She didn't look happy. She's not going to be happy tomorrow either, I said, then explained about the planned power outage. Pete laughed. Oh man, she's going to lose her mind. The summer social is her baby. She's been planning it for months. Not my problem, I said. She got the same notification everyone else did. And even if she did remember, demanding my generator isn't the solution. You know she's going to make this personal, right? Sharon doesn't forget when someone says no to her. Let her try, I said. I've dealt with worse than HOA presidents. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and went for my usual run through the neighborhood. The sun was already fierce, promising another scorching day. As I ran past the community center, I saw activity. Sharon was there with several other HOA board members, setting up tables and decorations under the ramada. Streamers, balloons, the works. They'd rented a snow cone machine and had what looked like several coolers lined up along the wall. Sharon saw me and glared. I waved and kept running. Back home, I showered, ate breakfast, and checked my work schedule. The crew was set to arrive at the job site at 1:30. I'd meet them there at 1:45. The transformer was located on Cactus Ridge Drive, ironically about 50 yards from Sharon's house. She lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a 4-bedroom territorial-style place with a professionally landscaped yard that probably cost more to water than most people's mortgages. At noon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Sharon standing there with another woman I recognized as Brenda Carmichael, the HOA secretary. It's past 3 o'clock, Sharon said. Wait, no, I checked my watch. It was noon. She was trying to confuse me. It's noon, I said flatly. Fine. But 3 o'clock is in 3 hours, and I don't see your generator loaded up for delivery. I'm here to give you one final warning. Deliver the generator by 3 or I'm issuing the fine. $500. Issue whatever fine you want, Sharon. I'm not giving you my generator. You have no legal right to it, and you know it. Brenda looked uncomfortable. She was a quiet woman in her 60s who I suspected had been railroaded into the secretary position because no one else wanted it. Sharon's face flushed red. This is about community, Harrison. About being a good neighbor. About contributing to something bigger than yourself. No, This is about you not planning properly and expecting other people to bail you out by surrendering their property. Did you consider renting a generator? There are at least 3 rental places within 10 miles of here. That's expensive and unnecessary when residents have generators sitting unused in their garages. My generator isn't unused. I use it regularly to make sure it's in working order, and I'll be using it tonight if needed. That wasn't technically true, but she didn't need to know that. Sharon opened her mouth to say something else, but I cut her off. We're done here. You need to leave my property now. She stood there for another moment, practically vibrating with anger, then spun on her heel and stalked away. Brenda gave me an apologetic look before following. I closed the door and checked the time again. Less than 2 hours until the power outage. I grabbed my work bag, double-checked that I had everything I needed, and headed out. The job site was already marked off when I arrived. Marcus and the rest of the crew were unloading equipment from the utility trucks. The transformer we were replacing was mounted on a concrete pad, surrounded by a chain-link fence. It had been in service for 32 years and was due for an upgrade to handle the increasing power demands of the neighborhood. Everything on schedule, I asked Marcus, like clockwork. We'll have power shut down at 1400, transformer swapped by 1600, power restored by 1630 if all goes well. Good. Let's do a safety briefing before we start. We gathered the crew, went over the procedures, confirmed everyone had their PPE, and discussed the specific hazards of working in extreme heat. I made sure we had plenty of water and scheduled regular breaks. At exactly 2 o'clock, we shut down the power. The transformer hummed for a moment, then went silent. Up and down the street, air conditioning units stopped running. The ambient noise of the neighborhood changed, becoming quieter and somehow more oppressive in the heat. I was reviewing the connection schematic with Marcus when I heard raised voices. Looking up, I saw Sharon storming down the street toward us. She was red-faced and sweating, her carefully styled hair beginning to droop in the heat. "What is going on?" she demanded. "The power just went out." I set down my clipboard. "Planned maintenance, Miss Hastings. You received notification 2 weeks ago." She stared at me, and I could see the exact moment recognition hit. Her eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. You're the one doing this." "I'm the electrical contractor supervising the work, yes. Williams Electrical Services. We have the contract with Arizona Power." "You did this on purpose. Because I asked for your generator. You're sabotaging the summer social." Several of my crew members had stopped working to watch the confrontation. I kept my voice professional and calm. "This maintenance has been scheduled for 3 weeks. The date was chosen well before any conversation about generators. If you'd like to verify that, you can contact Arizona Power directly. Now, I need to ask you to step back behind the safety perimeter. We're working with high-voltage equipment. How long is the power going to be out? Estimated restoration is 6:30 this evening. Could be sooner if everything goes smoothly. Could be later if we encounter complications. The summer social starts at 6. Then I suggest you plan accordingly. Excuse me, I have work to do." I turned back to Marcus, dismissing her. Sharon stood there for a moment, sputtering, then marched back toward the community center. "That was awkward," Marcus said quietly. "That was 3 years of HOA nonsense coming to a head," I replied. "Let's focus on the job." The next 3 hours were hot, sweaty work. We disconnected the old transformer, lifted it out with the crane truck, positioned the new unit, and began making connections. Everything was going according to plan until Marcus noticed something wrong with one of the mounting bolts. "Boss, come look at this." The bolt had threaded incorrectly and stripped. It wasn't a major problem, but it meant we needed to replace it before we could finish securing the transformer. That would add at least 45 minutes to the job. I checked my watch. 5:15. We weren't going to make the 6:30 estimate. All right, let's get the replacement and do this right. Safety first, speed second. While two crew members went to get the proper hardware from the truck, I walked the perimeter to make sure everything else was secure. That's when I saw Sharon again. She was with a tall man in a business suit despite the heat. They were standing about 20 yards away, and Sharon was pointing at me and talking animatedly. The man approached. "Mr. Williams, I'm Gerald Hawthorne, attorney for the Sagaro Heights HOA. Miss Hastings has informed me that you've deliberately scheduled this power outage to interfere with a community event as retaliation for an HOA request." I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Mr. Hawthorne, is it? Let me be very clear. This maintenance was scheduled 21 days ago through the proper channels with Arizona Power and Light. Every resident received notification via mail and email. The date and time were chosen based on equipment availability, crew scheduling, and utility company protocols. It has nothing to do with the HOA or any community event. If Miss Hastings failed to read her notifications or plan accordingly, that's not my problem or my responsibility." She also claims you refuse to provide a generator for community use, which violates HOA bylaws. The HOA bylaws don't give the board the authority to confiscate personal property. If Miss Hastings believes otherwise, she's welcome to seek a legal opinion. But I suspect you already know that, counselor, which is why you're approaching this from the angle of the power outage rather than the generator demand. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. He knew I was right. "What time will power be restored?" he asked. "Current estimate is 7:15, possibly 7:30. We encountered a minor complication that's adding to the timeline. Is there any way to expedite the work? Not without compromising safety or code compliance. We're working as efficiently as we can." He nodded slowly. "I'll inform Miss Hastings." For what it's worth, I told her this approach was unlikely to be productive. After he left, Marcus came over. "Legal trouble? HOA attorney. Nothing we need to worry about. How's the bolt replacement coming?" "Good. Another 20 minutes, then we can energize and test." It was 7:20 when we finally restored power. The transformer hummed to life, and I could hear air conditioning units kicking on up and down the street. We did a full check of all the connections, verified the voltage and load balance, and confirmed everything was functioning properly. "Good work, everyone," I told the crew. "Let's pack up and get out of this heat." As we were loading the final equipment into the trucks, Pete Morrison walked over. He was carrying 2 cold bottles of water, which he handed to me. "You're a hero to the neighborhood, you know that. Sharon's been having a meltdown all afternoon. I'm just doing my job. Your job that happened to coincide perfectly with her demanding your generator. Come on, man." The timing is beautiful. I allowed myself a small smile. "Pure coincidence, I assure you." "Right. Sure. Anyway, the summer social is a disaster. About half the people left when the power didn't come back on by 6:30. The snow cone machine melted. And Sharon's been on the phone with the HOA attorney for the last hour." "That would be Gerald Hawthorne. He seems like a reasonable guy. More reasonable than Sharon, anyway. Hey, speaking of which, she's coming this way again." Sharon did look worse for wear. Her makeup had run in the heat, her hair was a mess, and her blouse was stained with sweat. But the expression on her face was pure determination. "Harrison Williams, I am placing you under formal investigation by the HOA board for violating your duties as a resident and deliberately sabotaging community events. There will be a hearing next week, and I expect you to attend." "On what grounds?" I asked. "Failure to contribute to community welfare, deliberate interference with HOA activities, and conduct unbecoming a resident of Sagaro Heights." "Those aren't actual violations, Sharon. You're making things up now. The board will decide that." The hearing is scheduled for Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock at the community center. "You're required to attend." "I'll check my schedule. If I'm available, I'll consider it." Her eyes bulged. "It's not optional. Actually, it is. But I'll probably attend just to watch you try to make this stick." "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have equipment to secure." I turned away from her and climbed into my truck. Through the mirror, I watched her stand there for a moment before stalking back toward the community center. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday catching up on paperwork and Sunday relaxing by my pool. Several neighbors stopped by or texted to express support and share stories about their own conflicts with Sharon. Apparently, I was just the latest in a long line of residents who'd run afoul of the HOA president's authoritarian tendencies. Monday morning, I got a phone call from Brenda Carmichael. "Harrison, this is Brenda from the HOA. I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow's hearing." "I appreciate that, Brenda. What can you tell me?" "Sharon's been working herself into a frenzy all weekend. She's convinced she can get you fined or even put a lien on your property. But I've been reading the bylaws and I don't think she has a case. The problem is, she controls the board. Richard Paulson and Susan Matthews usually just vote however Sharon tells them to." "So you're saying this is a kangaroo court?" "I'm saying you might want to bring documentation, and maybe a lawyer if you have one." "Thanks for the warning, Brenda. I appreciate you looking out for me." Sharon's gone too far this time. A lot of residents are unhappy with how she's running things. This might be the push we need to make some changes. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the day preparing. I printed out copies of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the relevant sections. I pulled up the notification emails and letters about the power outage, complete with date stamps. I documented my work order from Arizona Power, showing when the job had been scheduled. And I wrote out a timeline of events, from Sharon's initial demand for my generator to her attorney's visit at the job site. Tuesday evening, I arrived at the community center at 6:45. The parking lot was more crowded than I expected. Apparently, word had gotten out about the hearing, and people wanted to watch. Inside, the main room had been set up with a long table at the front where Sharon, Richard Paulson, and Susan Matthews sat. Brenda was off to the side with a laptop, presumably to take minutes. There were about 40 residents in the folding chairs that had been arranged in rows. Sharon banged a gavel on the table. Where did she get a gavel? This special session of the Sagaro Heights HOA board is now in session. "We're here to address violations committed by resident Harrison Williams of 1247 Desert Willow Court. Mr. Williams, please come forward." I walked to the front and stood facing the board. "Mr. Williams, you are charged with the following violations: failure to comply with HOA directives, specifically the directive to provide your generator for community use, deliberate interference with HOA activities by scheduling a power outage during a community event, and conduct unbecoming a resident of Sagaro Heights." How do you respond to these charges? Not guilty to all charges, because none of them represent actual violations of the HOA bylaws, I said clearly. And I have documentation to support my position. The board will decide what constitutes a violation, Sharon said. Let's start with the generator. You refused a direct order from the HOA president. The HOA president doesn't have the authority to confiscate personal property. Show me anywhere in the bylaws where it says otherwise. Sharon flipped through her copy of the bylaws. Section 12, Paragraph 8. Residents are required to contribute to community events. That section refers to voluntary contributions, not mandatory surrender of personal property. And the word contribute in that context means participation, not property confiscation. If the framers of the bylaws intended for the board to have the power to commandeer personal property, they would have stated so explicitly. Richard Paulson leaned forward. He was a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Williams makes a valid point, Sharon. That section has always been interpreted as voluntary participation." Sharon shot him a withering look. "We can interpret it however we choose. The board has broad discretion." "Actually, you don't," I said. I handed Brenda copies of my documentation and asked her to distribute them to the board. Arizona HOA law specifically limits board authority to what's explicitly stated in the governing documents. You can't just make up rules as you go. Susan Matthews, a heavy-set woman with gray hair, was reading through the documents. "Sharon, did you know he was an electrical contractor when you scheduled this hearing? It doesn't matter what his profession is. It matters because he has documentation showing the power outage was scheduled 3 weeks before you asked him for his generator. The timing wasn't retaliation. It was coincidence." "Convenient coincidence," Sharon muttered. "Let me address the second charge," I said. "I didn't schedule the power outage. Arizona Power and Light scheduled it based on maintenance needs and equipment availability. I'm just the contractor who performed the work." Every resident in the affected area received written notification 2 weeks in advance. Would you like to see copies of those notifications? I handed over more documents. The board members read through them. Several residents in the audience were now whispering among themselves. "As for the third charge, conduct unbecoming a resident, I'd like to know specifically what conduct you're referring to. I've maintained my property according to HOA standards. I've paid my dues on time. I've never violated any actual bylaws. The only thing I'm guilty of is saying no to an unreasonable demand from the HOA president." "You were disrespectful," Sharon said. "You refused to cooperate with the board." "I disagreed with you, Sharon. That's not the same thing as being disrespectful. And residents have the right to disagree with the board when the board overreaches its authority." A man in the audience stood up. I recognized him as Tom Brennan, who lived on the street behind mine. "Point of order. Can residents speak at this hearing?" Sharon looked annoyed. "This is a closed board session." "Actually," Brenda said quietly, "the bylaws require all hearings involving potential fines or liens to be open sessions where the accused resident can present a defense and call witnesses." "Fine. What is it, Tom? I just want to say that Harrison is right." "Sharon, you've been running this HOA like a dictator for 3 years now. You fine people for stupid things like having their trash cans visible for 10 minutes past the pickup time. You tried to make us all repaint our houses in approved colors that aren't even listed in the bylaws. And now you're trying to punish someone for not giving you their personal property. Enough is enough." Several other residents voiced agreement. Sharon banged her gavel. "Order. We're here to address Mr. Williams' violations, not to air grievances about board policies." "Maybe we should be doing both," another voice called out. It was Pete Morrison. "I move that we vote on removing Sharon Hastings as HOA president." The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some supporting the motion, others looking confused about procedure. Sharon was banging her gavel and shouting for order. Finally, Brenda stood up. "Everyone, please, let me clarify the rules. Any resident can call for a vote on board member removal, but it requires a petition signed by 25% of homeowners. Once that threshold is met, a special election must be held within 30 days. Then I'll start a petition tonight, Pete said. Who's with me? At least 20 hands went up. Sharon's face had gone from red to almost purple. This hearing is about Harrison Williams and his violations. What violations? Richard Paulson said. He'd been reading through all the documentation I'd provided. Sharon, he's right about everything. We don't have the authority to take his generator. The power outage was legitimate maintenance that he didn't schedule himself. And he hasn't violated any actual bylaws. If we issue fines or try to put a lien on his property, he'll sue us and he'll win. Then the HOA will be liable for his legal fees. Richard, you're supposed to support the board. I'm supposed to support the HOA, which means not exposing us to legal liability because you're on a personal vendetta. Susan Matthews nodded. I agree with Richard. I move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Williams. Second, Richard said immediately. Sharon looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outnumbered. All in favor, Richard and Susan raised their hands. Brenda dutifully noted it in the minutes. The charges are dismissed, Brenda announced. Mr. Williams, you're free to go. Wait, I have something to say first, I said. I turned to address the room. I appreciate the support, everyone, but I want to be clear about something. I don't have a personal problem with Sharon. My issue is with the way power has been abused. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards. But that power has to be exercised responsibly and within the boundaries of the law. When board members start making up rules or interpreting the bylaws in creative ways to suit their personal agendas, it hurts everyone. I looked at Sharon. I hope you'll take this as a learning experience. Leadership isn't about forcing people to do what you want. It's about serving the community and working within the systems we've all agreed to. Sharon didn't respond. She was staring at the table, her jaw clenched. I left the community center to a round of applause from many of the residents. Outside, the night air was cooler, a relief after the heat of the day. Pete caught up with me in the parking lot. That was something, he said. I meant what I said about the petition. Sharon needs to go. That's up to you all to decide. I'm just glad this nonsense is over. Are you kidding? This is just the beginning. Sharon's not going to let this go. She'll find some other way to come after you. Let her try. I've got documentation of everything, and now the board knows she doesn't have a case. Over the next week, Pete and several other residents collected signatures for the removal petition. They needed signatures from 43 homeowners, 25% of the 172 homes in Sagaro Heights. By the following Monday, they had 67. The special election was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life in the neighborhood got interesting. Sharon apparently decided that if she was going down, she'd go down swinging. She started issuing fines for every minor violation she could find or imagine. Dead flowers in a planter. $50 fine. House number not clearly visible from the street. $75 fine. Car parked in driveway overnight instead of garage. $100 fine. Most residents ignored the fines, knowing they were likely to be overturned once Sharon was removed. But a few people paid them just to avoid the hassle, which only encouraged Sharon's behavior. Then she made a critical mistake. Mrs. Alina Patterson was an 84-year-old widow who'd lived in Sagaro Heights since the development was built. Her late husband had been one of the founding members of the HOA. She was beloved in the neighborhood, known for her kindness and her beautiful rose garden. Sharon issued Mrs. Patterson a $500 fine for having excessive garden decorations in her front yard. The decorations in question were 3 ceramic gnomes and a bird bath that had been there for 15 years. When Mrs. Patterson called Sharon to question the fine, Sharon told her that if she didn't pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on her property. Mrs. Patterson's son, David, was a litigation attorney in Phoenix. He was not amused. I heard about what happened next from Brenda, who called me with an update. David Patterson sent Sharon a cease and desist letter, Brenda told me. He's threatening to sue her personally, not just the HOA, for harassment and abuse of authority. He's also demanding that she rescind all the fines she's issued in the past 2 weeks. Good for him, I said. Sharon needs to understand that actions have consequences. It gets better. He also sent a letter to Richard and Susan, informing them that if they continue to allow Sharon to act this way, they'll be included in any lawsuit as co-defendants for failure to exercise their fiduciary duty to the HOA. How did they respond? Emergency board meeting tonight. They're voting to temporarily suspend Sharon's authority as president pending the election. I wasn't invited to the emergency meeting, but Pete attended and filled me in afterward. Richard and Susan had voted unanimously to suspend Sharon's presidential powers. She could remain on the board, but she couldn't issue fines, make unilateral decisions, or represent the HOA in any official capacity. Brenda would handle day-to-day administrative tasks, with major decisions requiring approval from both Richard and Susan. Sharon had apparently screamed at them for 20 minutes before storming out of the meeting. The next day I got a knock on my door. It was Sharon. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she'd clearly been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. We sat in my living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. "I'm sorry," she finally said, "for all of it. The generator, the hearing, the way I've been acting. You were right. I let the power go to my head." I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. "I've been HOA president for 3 years, and I thought I was doing a good job, keeping standards high, maintaining property values. But somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to people. I started thinking that being president meant everyone had to do what I said. And when you said no to me about the generator, I couldn't handle it. It felt like you were challenging my authority, my position, so I lashed out." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you were the first person to stand up to me and not back down. Everyone else either agreed with me or eventually gave in. You didn't. And now I'm facing a recall election that I'm going to lose, a potential lawsuit from David Patterson, and I've destroyed my reputation in the neighborhood. I'm trying to figure out how to fix this, and I thought maybe you could give me some advice." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I'd also seen her manipulative side. Was this real, or was it another ploy? "Sharon, I'm not sure what you want me to say. The problems you're facing are a direct result of your choices. You can't undo what's been done. The only thing you can do is try to make things right going forward. How? Start by rescinding all those bogus fines you issued. Personally apologize to Mrs. Patterson and anyone else you've targeted. At the board meeting before the election, acknowledge that you overstepped your authority and support whoever wins the presidency. And maybe consider stepping down from the board entirely, at least for a while. That's political suicide. You're already facing political suicide. This way, you at least go out with some dignity and maybe salvage some relationships with your neighbors." She was quiet for a long time. "I'll think about it," she finally said. After she left, I wasn't sure if she'd actually take my advice. But 2 days later, I got an email from Brenda. Sharon had rescinded all the fines issued in the past month. She'd sent personal apology letters to everyone who'd been fined, including me, even though my fines had already been dismissed. And she'd announced that she was withdrawing from the election, and resigning from the board effective immediately. The email included a statement from Sharon that Brenda had read at an emergency board meeting. I owe the residents of Sagaro Heights an apology. As HOA president, I lost sight of what the position is supposed to be about, serving the community, not ruling it. I made decisions based on personal feelings rather than the bylaws we all agreed to follow. I issued fines that were unjustified. I tried to force residents to give up their personal property, and I created an environment where people were afraid to disagree with me. That's not leadership. That's tyranny. I'm resigning from the board effective immediately, and I encourage everyone to vote for candidates who will actually listen to residents and work within the proper boundaries of HOA authority. I'm truly sorry for the damage I've caused. Pete called me right after the announcement. Did you see the email? Sharon resigned. I saw it. Sounds like she finally realized she was wrong. This is because of you, you know. You stood up to her when no one else would. I just defended my property rights. Anyone else would have done the same. You'd be surprised. A lot of people would have just given her the generator to avoid conflict. You didn't, and it exposed how far off the rails she'd gone. The neighborhood owes you one. The neighborhood doesn't owe me anything. I'm just glad it's over. But it wasn't quite over. A week later, I got a call from David Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's attorney's son. Mr. Williams, I wanted to thank you for what you did. My mother told me you were the catalyst for all of this. I didn't do anything special, just stood my ground. That's more than most people do. Look, I'm still considering legal action against Sharon Hastings. Not the HOA, just her personally. She caused my mother significant emotional distress with her threats, but I wanted to get your opinion first. Do you think she's genuinely remorseful, or is this just damage control? I thought about my conversation with Sharon. Honestly, I think she's remorseful now, but I don't know if she would be if she wasn't facing consequences. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can change. Fair enough. I'll hold off on the lawsuit for now, but I'll be watching. If she tries anything like this again with anyone in the neighborhood, I won't hesitate. That's reasonable. The special election happened 3 weeks later. 2 residents ran for the open board seat. Janet Morrison, Pete's wife, who was a retired school teacher, and Carlos Mendez, who worked in property management. Both seemed like reasonable people. Janet won with 63% of the vote. At the first board meeting with the new composition, Janet was elected HOA president. Her first act was to propose a comprehensive review of the bylaws to clarify board authority and resident rights, specifically to prevent the kind of overreach that Sharon had engaged in. The board unanimously approved the review and formed a committee of volunteers to work on it. I was asked to join the committee, and I agreed. Over the next 3 months, we worked through the bylaws section by section. We clarified the voluntary nature of community event participation. We explicitly stated that the board had no authority to confiscate or commandeer personal property. We established a formal appeals process for fines and other penalties. We created term limits for board positions, and we added provisions for resident-initiated votes on major decisions. The revised bylaws were presented to the community for a vote and passed with 87% approval. Sharon kept a low profile during all of this. She still lived in the neighborhood, but she wasn't as visible as before. I saw her occasionally at the grocery store or the post office. We'd nod to each other, nothing more. About 6 months after her resignation, I was working in my garage when she pulled up in her car. She got out and walked over looking nervous. "Hi, Harrison. Do you have a minute?" "Sure. What's up?" "I'm moving. My husband got a job opportunity in Denver, and we decided a fresh start would be good for both of us. I wanted to say goodbye and thank you." Thank me for what? For not letting me get away with it. For standing up to me when I was wrong. I've spent the last 6 months in therapy, working through why I acted the way I did. Turns out I have some control issues that I needed to address. If you'd just given me that generator, I would have kept escalating until I did something even worse. You stopped me before I could really hurt someone or do something criminal. I'm glad you got help, Sharon. I genuinely hope things work out for you in Denver. I hope so too, and I hope the HOA runs better without me. Janet seems like she's doing a good job. She is. The neighborhood's in good hands. Sharon hesitated, then extended her hand. I shook it. Goodbye, Harrison, and thank you again. Goodbye, Sharon. Good luck. I watched her drive away, then went back to working on my generator. It was time for routine maintenance again, making sure everything was in working order. The monsoon season would be starting soon, and I wanted to be prepared. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Want to come over for dinner tonight? We're grilling steaks. Sounds good, I replied. What time? 6. Bring beer. That evening, I walked over to Pete and Janet's house carrying a 6-pack of cold beer. Their backyard was full of neighbors. Apparently, the dinner had turned into an impromptu neighborhood gathering. Harrison, Janet called out, just in time. We're about to start the steaks. I settled into a lawn chair with Pete, enjoying the cooling evening air. The temperature had finally dropped below 90 degrees after another scorching day. So, Pete said, I heard Sharon's moving to Denver. Yeah, she stopped by earlier to say goodbye. Did she try to take your generator one last time? He grinned. No, she was actually pretty decent about it. Apologized, thanked me for standing up to her, said she's been in therapy. Good for her. Takes guts to admit when you're wrong. It does. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. You know what I realized, Pete said. This whole thing with Sharon, the power outage, the hearing, all of it. It happened because you knew your rights and weren't afraid to defend them. A lot of people just go along with whatever the HOA says because they don't want conflict. I spent too much time in the electrical trade dealing with building codes and regulations. You learn pretty quickly that rules are important, but so is knowing when someone's trying to bend them beyond what they actually say. Well, the neighborhood's better for it. We've got better bylaws, better leadership, and people feel like they can actually speak up now without getting slapped with a fine. The steaks were perfect, the beer was cold, and the company was good. As I sat there surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, I reflected on how different things could have been. If I'd just given Sharon the generator to avoid conflict, she would have continued her authoritarian approach to the HOA. Eventually, she would have pushed someone too far, caused real damage, maybe even gotten the HOA sued. Instead, by standing firm on a simple principle that the HOA couldn't commandeer personal property, I'd inadvertently sparked a change that made the whole community better. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance against unreasonable authority can have the biggest impacts. I just wanted to keep my generator. I'd ended up helping reform an entire HOA. Hey, Harrison, Janet called out. We're talking about doing a real community event next month. Nothing fancy, just a potluck at the community center. Would you be willing to serve on the planning committee? Will there be any demands for personal property? I asked with a smile. She laughed. Absolutely not. Just bring a dish to share and maybe some of that potato salad you made for the 4th of July party. That was amazing. I can do that. As the evening wore on and more neighbors arrived, I found myself thinking about Sharon one more time. Despite everything that had happened, I hoped she really had learned from the experience. I hoped Denver would give her the fresh start she needed. and I hoped she'd carry the lessons forward and never let power corrupt her again. But mostly, I was just grateful to be part of a community that had learned to value accountability, transparency, and respect for individual rights. The HOA served a purpose, but it was a purpose bounded by law and common sense, not by the whims of whoever happened to be in charge. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a work email. Arizona Power needed me to supervise another transformer upgrade in 3 weeks, this one in a different part of Phoenix. I replied confirming my availability, then put the phone away and grabbed another beer from the cooler. Work could wait. Tonight was about community, the real kind, built on mutual respect and genuine relationships rather than rules and regulations. "Toast," Pete announced, raising his beer bottle. "To Harrison, for reminding us all that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just say no to unreasonable demands." Everyone raised their drinks, and I felt myself smiling despite the attention. These were good people, and this was a good neighborhood. It had taken some conflict to get here, but we'd come out stronger on the other side. The generator incident, as it would be known in Saguaro Heights lore, became a story that was told to new residents as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and a celebration of standing up for your rights. It was probably embellished over time, the details growing more dramatic with each retelling, but the core truth remained. When someone in authority makes an unreasonable demand, sometimes the best response is a simple, firm no. Not out of stubbornness or spite, but out of respect for the principles that keep communities functioning fairly. As I sat there under the stars, surrounded by friends, with my generator safely secured in my garage where it belonged, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd done the right thing, even when it wasn't easy, and the neighborhood was better for it. That was worth more than any generator. The following month brought the potluck Janet had mentioned, and it was a genuine success. Nearly 100 residents showed up, bringing dishes that reflected the diverse backgrounds of our community. There were no demands, no fines, no power struggles. Just people enjoying each other's company and celebrating what made Saguaro Heights a good place to live. I brought my potato salad as promised, and it was gone within 20 minutes. Several people asked for the recipe, which I gladly shared. It was my grandmother's recipe, passed down through 3 generations, and I was always happy to share good food with good people. As the evening wound down and people started packing up to leave, Alina Patterson approached me. She was moving slowly, using a cane, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Mr. Williams, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." "Mrs. Patterson, please call me Harrison." "And you don't need to thank me. I was just protecting my property." "You were doing more than that, dear. You were standing up for all of us." Sharon had been bullying residents for years, and everyone was too afraid to push back. When you refused to give her your generator, you showed everyone else that it was okay to say no. My son told me that if you hadn't stood your ground first, he might not have felt comfortable defending me the way he did. She patted my hand with her weathered fingers. "You're a good man, Harrison Williams. This neighborhood is lucky to have you." As I drove home that night, her words stayed with me. I'd never thought of myself as particularly brave or heroic. I just defended what was mine and stood up for basic principles. But maybe that was enough. Maybe heroism wasn't about grand gestures, but about small moments of integrity when it would be easier to just go along. The generator sat in my garage, ready for the next monsoon season or power outage. But it represented something more now. It was a symbol of individual rights, of community accountability, of the importance of knowing when to stand firm and when to compromise. And if another Sharon Hastings ever came along and made unreasonable demands, well, I'd know exactly what to do. Stand my ground, document everything, and trust that when you're in the right, the truth will eventually prevail. That was the real lesson of the generator incident. Not that HOAs were bad or that authority should always be challenged, but that communities work best when power is exercised responsibly, and residents have the courage to speak up when it isn't. As I pulled into my driveway and saw my well-maintained home in the peaceful neighborhood I'd chosen to call home, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for the confrontation with Sharon, because it had made the community stronger. Grateful for neighbors like Pete and Janet who'd supported me. Grateful for the legal system that protected property rights and individual freedoms. And grateful that I'd had the knowledge and courage to stand up when it mattered. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work supervising electrical jobs across Phoenix. But tonight, I was just a satisfied homeowner in a well-run HOA that had learned valuable lessons about the proper use of power. And my generator, it was exactly where it belonged. In my garage, ready when I needed it and firmly under my control. That was all I'd ever asked for.